I sold everything I had, my savings, my inheritance, my peace of mind, to buy an apartment for a man I believed was dying, because he looked me in the eyes every night and told me he was running out of time. His mother held my hand at the kitchen table and cried about losing her only son, and I emptied my accounts without a second thought, because that's what you do when you love someone who's disappearing. But when a stranger's Instagram post showed my dying husband laughing on a beach in the Maldives with a woman I'd never seen before, I realized the only thing that had ever been sick in our marriage was the lie I'd been living inside. And what I did next made sure he never laughed at my expense again. The day my husband told me he was dying, we were sitting on the couch in our rented one-bedroom apartment in Syracuse, New York. It was a Tuesday in January. The heating was on too high, the windows were fogging up, and I was folding laundry while half watching a cooking show. Normal, ordinary. The kind of evening you forget by Thursday. My name is Tessa Caldwell. I'm 29 years old. At the time of this story, I worked as a dental hygienist at a family practice near the university. Steady, respectable work that paid me enough to cover our rent, our groceries, our car insurance, and the small monthly contribution I made to the savings account my grandmother had started for me before she passed. That savings account was the only real financial asset I had. $86,000, built slowly over a decade of birthdays, holidays, and the modest inheritance Grandma Ruth had left me when she died. I never touched it. It was my safety net, my future, the one thing in my life that felt permanent. My husband, Cole Brannigan, worked sporadically. He'd had a series of jobs since we married 3 years earlier: warehouse work, delivery driving, a brief stint at a car dealership. But none of them lasted. He always had a reason. The manager was unreasonable, the hours were bad for his health, the work was beneath his potential. I'd stopped pushing after the second year, partly because arguing about it was exhausting, and partly because Cole had a way of turning every conversation about his employment into a conversation about my lack of faith in him. So when he turned to me that Tuesday evening, muted the television, and said, "Tessa, I need to tell you something, and I need you to be strong," the first thing I felt wasn't fear. It was guilt, because my immediate thought was, he lost another job, and my immediate reaction was fatigue. And then he said the word. "I went to see a specialist last week, Dr. Hammond over at Krause. I didn't tell you because I wanted to have all the information first." He paused, swallowed. His eyes glistened. "It's my kidneys, Tessa. Stage 3 chronic kidney disease. The doctor says without treatment, it's going to get worse. A lot worse." The laundry in my hands went still. The cooking show babbled on about broth reduction in the background. And the world, my small, careful, ordinary world, cracked open. "What does that mean?" I whispered. "It means I need treatment. Possibly a transplant eventually. It means my life is going to change." "Our life," he cried. Cole Brannigan, a man who prided himself on never showing weakness, who watched action movies without blinking and laughed at funerals because he said grief was performative, sat on our secondhand couch and cried with his face in his hands while I held him and told him we'd get through this together. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, planning. I'd go with him to every appointment. I'd research the condition. I'd adjust our budget to account for medical bills. Whatever it took, whatever it cost, I would hold this family together, because that's what I'd promised when I married him. In sickness and in health. And I meant it. Over the following weeks, Cole's condition became the organizing principle of our lives. He went to appointments that I drove him to, sitting in the car while he went inside because he said it made him anxious to have me in the waiting room. He came home with pamphlets and printouts and medication bottles that he kept in the bathroom cabinet. He grew thinner. Not dramatically, but noticeably the way a person shrinks when they stop eating full meals. He had bad days where he stayed in bed until noon, and worse days where he sat on the couch in the dark and told me he was scared. And then his mother got involved. Carol Brannigan. A woman who could cry on command the way other people could sneeze on command. Instantly, convincingly, and always in service of a desired outcome. She lived an hour south of us in Binghamton, and within 2 weeks of Cole's diagnosis, She was at our apartment every other day, dabbing her eyes with tissues and speaking in the hushed, reverent tones of a woman preparing for a funeral. "My boy," she'd say, clutching Cole's hand while he sat pale and stoic in the recliner. "My only boy. We can't lose him, Tessa. We have to do everything. Everything to save him." "We will, Carol," I said. "Every time. Without hesitation. He needs comfort. He needs stability. He needs a home. A real home, not this rental. The stress of this apartment, the noise from the neighbors, the mold in the bathroom, it's making him worse, Tessa. He needs a clean, quiet place to heal. A home. That was the seed. Planted carefully, watered with tears, and cultivated with the patience of a woman who had done this kind of gardening before. The idea didn't arrive all at once. It arrived the way Carol intended it to. Gradually, inevitably, like a conclusion I was supposed to reach on my own. It started with the apartment search. Carol found listings. Not rentals, purchases. Condominiums, small houses, affordable units on the outskirts of the city. She'd email them to me with notes. "This one has a ground floor bedroom, perfect for Cole's bad days." Or, "Great ventilation in this unit. Good for his breathing." She never said buy. She said invest in his health. She said give him a reason to fight. Cole echoed her, not aggressively, softly, the way someone does when they're pretending not to ask for something while asking for exactly that. "I know it's a lot, Tessa. I'd never ask you to spend your savings. But the doctor said stress is the biggest factor in kidney disease progression. And living in this apartment, hearing the neighbors at 2 a.m, worrying about the lease renewal, it's not helping. I can feel it." He'd touch his side when he said it, his kidney area. A small reflexive gesture that made the abstract medical diagnosis feel terrifyingly physical. I want to explain something about myself that might be hard to understand from the outside. I am not a stupid person. I graduated near the top of my class. I manage a household budget down to the penny. I can spot a suspicious insurance claim at work from the way a patient fills out their intake form. But I loved Cole. And love, real, committed, all in love, is its own kind of blindness. Not because it makes you dumb, but because it rearranges your priorities. When someone you love tells you they're sick, the part of your brain that evaluates risk and calculates odds gets overridden by the part that says, protect them. Whatever it costs. Whatever it takes. And Carol knew that. She'd watched me for 3 years. She'd studied the architecture of my loyalty, identified the load-bearing walls, and knew exactly where to apply pressure. The apartment she ultimately steered me toward was a 2-bedroom unit in a quiet complex on the north side of Syracuse. New construction, clean lines, modern kitchen, in-unit laundry, a balcony with a view of a small park. The price? $112,000. "It's perfect for Cole," Carol said, sitting at my kitchen table with the listing printed out and highlighted in 3 colors. Ground floor, no stairs, quiet neighborhood. And it's an investment, Tessa. Property values in that area are climbing. You're not spending money, you're growing it. I looked at the listing. I looked at Cole, sitting in the recliner with a blanket over his legs, looking thinner and more fragile than I'd ever seen him. "I'd have to use my savings," I said. "Almost all of it." "It's your grandmother's money, right?" Carol said. She'd done her homework. "What would Ruth want you to do with it?" That was the stroke that broke me. Invoking my grandmother, the woman who had saved that money, penny by penny, so that I would have security and choices, to convince me to empty the account. Carol said it with such gentle conviction that it sounded like wisdom instead of manipulation. I made the purchase. I put down $85,000 and financed the remainder. The unit went into Cole's name. Carol's suggestion, framed as a legal precaution in case my creditors, I had none, ever came after my assets. It made no sense, and I knew it made no sense. But by that point, I was operating on a different kind of logic. The logic of love and fear and the desperate need to do something, anything to help the man I'd married, We moved in March. Cole seemed better almost immediately. More energy, more appetite, more present. He smiled at me across the new kitchen counter and said, "You saved my life, Tessa." I believed him. I believed every word, every cough, every wince, every appointment he drove to alone. For 4 months, I believed. The truth arrived on a Sunday afternoon in July, delivered not by a confession or a confrontation, but by an algorithm. The cold, indifferent mathematics of social media, pushing a stranger's post into my feed because someone I followed had liked it. I was lying on the couch in the new apartment. The apartment I'd bought. The apartment in Cole's name. Scrolling through Instagram while Cole was away for the weekend. A wellness retreat, he'd called it. Something his doctor had recommended for kidney patients. A therapeutic program at a resort upstate. Carol had helped arrange it. She'd even offered to drive him. "You deserve a break, too," Cole had said, kissing my forehead before he left. "Just relax. Watch your shows. I'll be home Monday." I was relaxed. I was watching my shows. And then I saw it. A photo. Posted by a woman named Brielle Keene. A name I didn't recognize. An account I didn't follow. Instagram had surfaced it because a mutual acquaintance had left a comment. A string of fire emojis and the words, "Living your best life." The photo showed a couple on a beach. White sand, turquoise water, the kind of impossibly beautiful landscape that only exists in travel magazines and honeymoon brochures. The woman, Brielle, was tanned and smiling in a bikini, leaning against a man who had his arm around her waist and a cocktail in his free hand. The man was Cole. My Cole. My dying Cole. My Cole, who was supposed to be at a wellness retreat in upstate New York, managing his chronic kidney disease with meditation and therapeutic walks. That Cole was standing on a beach that the geotag identified as the Maldives, looking healthier, happier, and more alive than I'd seen him in months. I sat up. My phone was shaking. No, my hands were shaking. I zoomed in. There was no mistaking it. The jawline, the birthmark below his left ear, the tattoo on his forearm that I'd traced with my finger 1,000 times in bed. It was him. I scrolled through Brielle's account. She'd been posting for 3 days. Beach photos, restaurant photos. A sunset shot captioned, "Paradise with my person," followed by a heart emoji. And then the one that made the floor drop out from under me? A video. I pressed play. Cole was sitting at an outdoor bar, golden light behind him, drink in hand, laughing. Really laughing. The full, unguarded kind of laugh I hadn't heard from him in months. And then he spoke, looking at the camera, at Brielle, with an expression of total relaxation and joy. "Best vacation of my life," he said. "And it didn't cost me a penny." Brielle laughed. The video ended. I sat on the couch in the apartment I'd bought with my grandmother's savings. The apartment that was in his name. And I felt something I'd never felt before. Not sadness, not even anger, not yet. Something more primal. The sensation of the entire world rearranging itself around me while I stayed perfectly still, understanding, with absolute and terrible clarity, that I had been the mark. Everything. The diagnosis, the symptoms, the thin face, the fatigue, the medication bottles in the cabinet, the appointments I drove him to and waited in the car for, the pamphlets, the printouts, Carol's tears, the apartment search, the purchase, the title in his name. All of it, every single piece had been a performance, a con, a carefully orchestrated scheme to extract $85,000 from a woman who loved too much and questioned too little. I put the phone down. I picked it up again. I screenshotted everything. Every photo, every caption, every geotag, the video, Brielle's profile, the comments. I saved them to a folder, then to a cloud drive, then emailed them to myself. My hands were still shaking, but my mind had gone cold and clear, the way it does when survival takes over from grief. Then I called Olivia, my oldest friend, the one person I trusted without condition. "Tessa, what's wrong?" "Cole isn't sick. He was never sick. He's in the Maldives with another woman, and he used my money to buy himself an apartment." Silence. Then, "I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there." Olivia arrived in 20 minutes. She sat beside me on the couch, looked at every screenshot, watched the video twice, and then said the words that became my compass for everything that followed. "Tessa, you are not going to cry about this man. You are going to destroy him. Legally." She was right. And she was the person I needed beside me because Olivia wasn't just my best friend. She was a paralegal at a family law firm in Syracuse, and she understood exactly how systems worked when someone had been defrauded by a spouse. That night, while Cole was presumably still laughing on a beach, Olivia and I built a case. First, the medical records. Cole had claimed to be seeing a Dr. Hammond at Krause Hospital. I called the hospital the next morning, a Monday, and asked to verify a patient's treatment history. The answer came back in less than 2 minutes. There was no record of a Cole Brannigan being treated at Krause Hospital. No appointments, no specialist referrals, no diagnosis. There was no Dr. Hammond in the nephrology department. There was no nephrology department at Krause. It had been relocated to a different facility 3 years earlier. Cole hadn't even bothered to get the hospital right. The medication bottles in the bathroom cabinet? I checked them. 2 were over-the-counter supplements repackaged in prescription bottles. The third was an empty bottle of a common blood pressure medication that you could get from any urgent care clinic with a 5-minute complaint about headaches. None of it was kidney medication, not even close. Second, the apartment. The title was in Cole's name. That was the part that made my stomach turn, because it meant that legally, the property I'd paid for with my savings belonged to him. But Olivia pointed out something critical. The funds for the down payment had come from my personal savings account, an account that predated our marriage and was clearly documented as separate property. The transfer from my account to the title company was traceable, time-stamped, and unambiguous. "He put the apartment in his name using your money," Olivia said. "That's not clever. That's evidence." Third, Brielle. A quick search revealed that Brielle Keene had worked at the same car dealership where Cole had briefly been employed 2 years earlier. Their social media history suggested they'd been in contact for at least 18 months, long before Cole's diagnosis. Photos of them at restaurants, at a concert, at what appeared to be a New Year's Eve party while I was at home nursing what Cole had told me was a kidney flare. 18 months. He'd been planning this for at least 18 months. The illness, the apartment, the title transfer, it wasn't a spontaneous scam. It was a project, an operation, with milestones and timelines and a mother who served as co-producer. Because Carol knew. Of course Carol knew. The woman who'd cried at my kitchen table and invoked my dead grandmother's name to convince me to empty my savings. She'd known the whole time. She'd been part of it from the beginning, steering me toward the purchase, suggesting Cole's name on the title, manufacturing urgency with her tears. Monday afternoon, I hired an attorney. Not through Olivia's firm, a separate practice that specialized in fraud and asset recovery. His name was Daniel Voss, and he had the demeanor of a man who had seen every variation of human dishonesty and was no longer surprised by any of them. I showed him the screenshots, the fake medical records, the financial trail, and the title documents. He reviewed everything in silence, nodding occasionally, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "How quickly can you move?" I asked. "Fast. This is textbook fraud, obtaining property through intentional deception. The medical hoax establishes the scheme, the title transfer establishes the theft, and the social media evidence establishes the motive. Your husband and his mother made one critical mistake." "What's that?" "They assumed you wouldn't find out. And they didn't bother to cover their tracks because they thought you'd be too heartbroken to look." He was right. They hadn't hidden anything. The fake diagnosis was built on lies so thin they collapsed at the first phone call. The financial trail was clean and obvious. The social media posts were public. They'd treated me like an idiot, and they'd been so confident in my gullibility that they hadn't even bothered to build a convincing cover. Daniel filed emergency motions that week. A fraud complaint, a request for a temporary restraining order on the apartment to prevent Cole from selling it, and a petition for the court to freeze any joint assets pending investigation. He also filed a criminal referral with the district attorney's office because what Cole and Carol had done wasn't just a civil matter. It was criminal fraud. Cole came home from the Maldives on Wednesday. He walked into the apartment with a tan, a relaxed smile, and a bag of souvenirs. He found me sitting at the kitchen table with Daniel Voss's business card and a folder of printed evidence. Tessa, hey, I missed you. The retreat was incredible. I feel like a new... Sit down, Cole. He sat. His smile faded as he registered my expression. Not tears, not hysteria, not the emotional collapse he'd probably been trained to manage. Something much worse. Calm. I know everything, I said. The fake diagnosis, Brielle, the Maldives, your mother's involvement. And as of this morning, there's a restraining order on this apartment preventing you from selling, transferring, or encumbering it in any way. The color drained from his face. That perfect Maldives tan went gray in about 4 seconds. Tessa, wait, let me explain. You don't get to explain. You get to listen. My attorney has filed a fraud complaint. The district attorney's office has been notified. And every screenshot, every record, every piece of evidence is documented, backed up, and in the hands of people who know exactly what to do with it. Cole opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in our marriage, the man who always had an answer, always had a story, always had a way to turn the conversation, had nothing. I stood up, picked up my bag, walked to the door. The apartment is in your name, I said, but it was bought with my money, and the court is going to make sure it comes back to me. Enjoy it while you can. I closed the door behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't need to. The legal process took 5 months. 5 months of depositions, document reviews, court hearings, and the slow, grinding machinery of a justice system that moves at its own pace regardless of how urgently you need it. But it moved, and everything it uncovered made Cole and Carol's position worse. Daniel Voss was methodical. He subpoenaed Cole's bank records and discovered that the medical expenses Cole had claimed to be paying, the specialist visits, the medication, the therapeutic treatments, had actually been deposits into a separate savings account Cole maintained under a slightly altered version of his name. That account had funded the Maldives trip, multiple dinners and hotel stays with Brielle, and a down payment on a second vehicle that was registered to Carol's address. He subpoenaed Carol's phone records and found text messages between her and Cole dating back 14 months, laying out the plan in detail. The texts were devastating, not because they were coded or subtle, but because they were brazen. Carol had texted Cole, "Tell her the doctor said stress is making it worse. That'll push her toward the apartment." Cole had replied, "She'll do it. She does everything I tell her." And Carol's response, the one that the judge would later read aloud in court, "We tricked that idiot into buying us an apartment. Best investment I ever made." That text, those words, became the centerpiece of the case. Not because they were the most legally significant piece of evidence, but because they captured in 12 words the total contempt with which Cole and Carol had regarded me. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a partner. I was an idiot. A resource to be harvested and discarded. The court ruled in my favor on every count. The apartment was ordered transferred back to my name, with Cole responsible for all legal fees associated with the transfer. The fraud complaint resulted in criminal charges against both Cole and Carol, charges that carried potential prison time, though the district attorney ultimately offered a plea arrangement that included probation, community service, restitution payments, and a permanent record. Cole didn't fight it. His attorney advised him to take the plea, and he did, standing in a courtroom in a wrinkled suit, looking nothing like the man who'd laughed on a beach in the Maldives, saying, "Yes, Your Honor," in a voice so small it barely carried past the first row. Carol fought. She hired her own attorney and claimed she'd been unaware of Cole's deception, that she genuinely believed her son was ill and had only been trying to help. It was a performance worthy of an award, and it lasted exactly until Daniel Voss introduced the text messages into evidence. Carol's attorney requested a recess. When they returned, Carol accepted the same plea terms as her son, The judge, before accepting the pleas, made a statement that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She looked at Cole and Carol and said, "The defendant and his co-conspirator exploited the most fundamental human instinct, the desire to protect someone we love, for financial gain. They manufactured a medical crisis, manipulated a woman's grief and loyalty, and treated her generosity as proof of stupidity. The court finds this conduct not merely fraudulent, but deeply cruel, and the sentences reflect that assessment." I sat in the gallery and listened and did not cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because I'd done my crying months ago, alone, on a couch in an apartment I'd bought for a man who was laughing at me from across an ocean. I'd earned the right to sit in that courtroom dry-eyed, and I did. After the hearings, after the paperwork, after the title transfer and the restitution schedule and the final meeting with Daniel Voss, where he shook my hand and said, "You did good, Tessa." I went home. Not to the apartment. I'd sold it. Quickly, cleanly, at a small profit that covered the legal fees and left me with enough to rebuild my savings account. Not to the level it had been. Not yet. But to a number that felt like a beginning. I moved into a studio apartment on the west side of Syracuse. Small, affordable, mine. I furnished it with things I chose for no one's benefit but my own. A reading lamp that gave off warm light, a kitchen table just big enough for one, a bookshelf I filled with novels I'd been meaning to read for years but hadn't because Cole always wanted the television on. The divorce was finalized in November. I didn't contest anything because there was nothing to contest. Cole had no assets I wanted. The car at Carol's house was repossessed. His savings account was emptied by legal fees, and the life he'd built on my money had collapsed like the hollow structure it always was. Brielle, for whatever it's worth, disappeared from social media shortly after the court proceedings became public. I don't know if she knew about the fraud. I don't know if she was a participant or a prop. I decided it didn't matter. She was Cole's problem, not mine, and I was done solving Cole's problems. The hardest part, harder than the discovery, harder than the legal battle, harder than sitting in a courtroom while a judge described my marriage as a crime scene, was the shame. Not shame for what Cole had done, but shame for what I'd allowed. For how completely I'd believed him. For how willingly I'd emptied my grandmother's savings account because a man I loved told me he was dying, and a woman I trusted told me it was the right thing to do. I went to therapy. A woman named Dr. Adler, who had kind eyes and a direct manner, and who, in our second session, said something that I've taped to my bathroom mirror. Being trusting is not the same as being foolish. You weren't deceived because you were stupid. You were deceived because you were loyal. And loyalty is not a flaw. It's a strength that was exploited by people without conscience. She was right, and it took me months to fully believe her. But I got there. Not all at once. In layers. The way you rebuild anything that was burned to the foundation. Slowly, carefully, with better materials this time. A year has passed. I'm 30 now. I work at the same dental practice. They held my position through everything. And my boss, Dr. Kaplan, quietly adjusted my schedule during the worst of the legal proceedings without ever making me feel like a burden. I owe her more than she knows. My savings account has crossed $40,000. Not 86. Not yet. But I'm building it the same way Grandma Ruth built it. Steadily, patiently, without shortcuts and without trust in anyone who promises that shortcuts exist. I go to therapy every other week. I run 3 mornings a week, something I started during the worst of it, when my body needed to move faster than my thoughts. I've read more books in the past year than in the previous 5 combined. I cook meals I actually enjoy instead of meals designed to please someone else. I sleep in the center of my bed because there's no one to make room for, and that feels less like loneliness now and more like freedom. Cole sent me a letter 2 months ago. Handwritten, forwarded through my attorney because he no longer has my address. I didn't open it. I gave it to Dr. Adler, who read it and summarized it as a request for forgiveness wrapped in self-pity. I told her to shred it. She did. Carol, I've heard through a mutual acquaintance, has been telling people in Binghamton that I ruined her son's life. That I was vindictive, that I exaggerated, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by lawyers. She's rewriting history the way she's always rewritten history, with tears and conviction and the unshakable belief that she's the victim in every story she's ever been a part of. I don't engage. I don't correct. I don't respond. Because the truth isn't something I need to defend. It's documented in court records, in text messages, in a judge's statement read aloud in a room full of people who heard exactly what Cole and Carol thought of me. We tricked that idiot into buying us an apartment. Those words used to make me sick. Now they make me something else. Not angry, resolved. They remind me of who I was, who I almost stayed, and who I chose to become instead. They remind me that the worst thing someone ever said about me was the thing that finally set me free. Last month, on a Saturday afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where Grandma Ruth is buried. I brought flowers, yellow roses, her favorite, and I sat on the bench beside her headstone and talked to her the way I used to when she was alive. I lost your money, Grandma. All of it. I gave it to someone who didn't deserve a penny, and he spent it laughing at me from a beach. The wind moved through the trees. The roses nodded on their stems. But I got it back. Not the money, myself. I got myself back. And I'm building the account again. Slowly. The way you taught me. I sat there for a long time, in the quiet, with the roses and the wind and the name carved in stone of a woman who had saved every dollar so her granddaughter would never be powerless. I'm not powerless. Not anymore. Not ever again. And the man who laughed in the Maldives? He's back in Syracuse now. Probation, community service, a criminal record that follows him like a shadow. No apartment, no Brielle, no beach, just consequences. The kind that don't wash away with the tide.